Good evening. I'm Beth Golay, and as chair of the Howard Wooden Lecture Series and on behalf of the Friends of the Wichita Art Museum, I would like to thank you all for attending this evening. And before Patricia introduces our speaker, I'd like to give you just a little bit of background about our lecture series. All of the Howard Wooden Lectures are made possible by the members of this Friends group, which established our endowment fund. It started back in 1985 when Howard Wooden, the director of the Wichita Art Museum at the time, suggested to the Friends group that an endowment fund could be developed as part of the Art Museum's 50th anniversary celebration. In 1997, the Endowment for Exhibitions and Acquisition of Art was established, as well as the Library Fund. Then 3 years later, the Howard Wooden Lecture Series was created to fund lectures at the Wichita Art Museum with the caveat that all lectures would be free and open to the public. Now, all of the Friends endowments are managed by the Wichita Community Foundation. Over the years, these endowment funds have grown from $234,000 to just over $3 million. We have given the museum over $2 million to date for art acquisitions, materials for the library, and to make these educational lectures available for free. And now, Dr. Patricia McDonald, the director of our Wichita Art Museum, will do the honors in presenting to you our speaker for the evening. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, what a difference a day makes. I'm so glad this lecture was not last night. And what a lovely spring night it is, and welcome all of you in our overflow lounge. I'm going to call it, they're back there in the lounge. The Friends of the Art Museum are so fabulous. You've just heard this wonderful endowment that they have that helps us with the wooden, but it also helps us with exhibitions and acquisitions and our library. It's a beloved volunteer group that, while they help support us, financially, they also help us with so many meaningful activities and events at the Art Museum. I love that when an important art museum director retired, they decided to establish a lecture series in his honor. Of course I would. He was the director at this museum from 1975 to 1989. He was part of the building of the Edward Larrabee Barnes expansion that occurred in 1977. He immensely helped expand the art collection. And it's really a grand thing when someone of significance really helps to elevate the museum, that a lecture is dedicated in his honor. And we're here this evening with a really distinguished speaker, the Senior Curator of European Art from the Brooklyn Museum, Lisa Small, who, because we're such a filled auditorium, is standing over here. This is a return visit for her. She was here last year. She was the curator of the Monet to Matisse exhibition. But she was also the person who helped to bring the George O'Keeffe exhibition into her museum and translate it into their galleries. And thrilled that we have her back to share her insights. But I'm gonna return to Lisa. We have had such a great run to date with this exhibition. I'm not at my desk very often. If you try to call me, I promise I will call you back, but when you call, likely I'm not there in meetings and out and about, and I get up into our galleries now in the afternoons, and more often in the past, it's you are able to come here and have a peaceful visit. Now, I challenge you to come and have a peaceful visit, in the sense that it's wonderful that we are busy and people are coming, and they're coming with friends, and they're reading the labels. Lisa, they're reading your labels. So we've just had a really great run. So please indulge me. We also have had fabulous businesses and people stepped forward to help us to bring this exhibition to Wichita. Lisa, we wish it came for free. That's just not the reality of an exhibition of this excellence, and all the different museums across the country who vie to bring it to their community. So the lead sponsors for the George O'Keeffe exhibition are Paula and Barry Downing. The Latner Family Foundation and Judy Slauson provide additional major underwriting. Charles Baker and Dr. Dennis and Ann Ross are principal sponsors. The Trust Company of Kansas, the Fred and Mary Koch Foundation, Celebrity Cruises, and Emprise Bank are substantial corporate sponsors. Generous support also arrived from Louise Barron, Donna Bunk, DeVore Foundation, Eric Engstrom and Robert Bell, Mary Eves, Rich and Jerry Giblin, Norma Griever, Sonia Gredham and Chris Brunner, the Gridley Family Foundation, John and Carrie Hageman, Sandra Langle, Mike and Dee Michaelis, Tom and Mindy Page, Will and Kristen Price, Debbie and Ron Sinclair, Mary Sue Smith, Sarah Smith, the K.T. Wiedemann Foundation, and additional exhibition patrons include Anna Martin Bauer, Emily Bonavia, Dr. James and Nancy Bramer, Dr. Allen and Sharon Ferry, Tony and Bud Gates, Trish Higgins, Richard Height and Anita Jones, Delmar and Mary Clucky, Dr. Barry and Jane Murphy, Georgia and Keith Stevens, Marnie Vliet, Stone and David Stone, Sue and Kurt Watson. And of course, all our exhibitions receive support, as you heard before, from the Friends of the Wichita Art Museum and the City of Wichita. Please help me, because there's so many people that I just named that are in the room or here this evening. Please help me to thank these wonderful people who stepped forward tonight. And I have one more shout out that I think probably additionally needs applause. It is the Friends of the Wichita Art Museum who purchased for this museum the George O'Keeffe that has been part of the exhibition since the very start and is touring the country. And we've only brought it back home for the couple of months that it's here. It's still going on the national tour. So thank you, Friends of the Art Museum, again. So coming back to what we really are here to learn and know about, and the talk titled Art, Image, Dress, George O'Keeffe and Frida Kahlo. And I thought we had some, Georgia and Frida came this evening. Here's a Frida. There's a Georgia. I think Georgia and Frida should stand up. Stand up. You two, stand up. Georgia and Frida were brave, bold women. We're about to hear more about this. And these ladies, that they came like this evening, they too are brave and bold women. So Lisa isn't a stranger to the Wichita Art Museum or Wichita. Actually, she came first in recent years. In 2015, because the Wichita Art Museum hosted the American Moderns collection from Brooklyn, and she was a courier for that. We know and love her additionally. Last spring, she came in conjunction with the exhibition that she curated, Monet de Matisse. She's been with the Brooklyn, and we have her back again. We're pretty excited. She's been with the Brooklyn Museum since 2011. And she got her foot in the door, and they've been promoting her ever since. She completed an exhibition in 2014 called Killer Heels, The Art of High Heels. I think that qualified her to work on George O'Keeffe's clothing. She has also held really key positions at such institutions as the American Federations of Art and the Dehesh Museum, both in New York City. Her expertise is in French modernism, and particularly 19th century. But one of the really, I personally believe, wonderful things about working in art museums is that you are able to be a generalist and stretch yourself to work in different moments and times. She's the lucky person who was able to work with Wanda Korn, the guest curator to the Brooklyn Museum, for the George O'Keeffe exhibition. So she worked and was an important helpmeet with Wanda to translate years and decades of research into a museum exhibition that would make sense to the visitors. And that is no small feat. She also recently completed the installation of the exhibition Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving. So both of these exhibitions include the artist's clothing that we've just learned by the Fridas that we have here were very unique, as was George's. And the juxtaposition of clothing and portrait photography and their work helps to learn more about the biography of that person, but just gives a deeper, richer insight to the work and to the time period. These are artists who made aesthetic choices in every different detail of their lives, in their clothing and self-presentation, as well as how they put paint to a canvas. And Lisa's going to tell us the story of how you take that kind of rich life experience for a very bold, forceful personality and turn it into an art exhibition that is meaningful and makes sense to the public. So help me to welcome Lisa back to Wichita again and to the podium.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Patricia. And it is incredible to be back in friendly Wichita. I love it here. So thank you very much for inviting me back to talk about this. Where is my, okay. So we'll go to our first slide. Maybe we could have the lights down just a little so we can see all this. Perfect. Okay. So, Georgia O'Keeffe and Frida Kahlo are two of the most celebrated modern artists of the 20th century. O'Keeffe's paintings distill nature into the crisp lines and abstracted forms of modernism. Kahlo's paintings are bold, uncompromising, and deeply personal. Both were married to influential men who introduced them to public life, Alfred Stieglitz and Diego Rivera. They were both widely photographed and each known in their lifetimes for their art as well as for how they looked and dressed. Simple black and white dresses and suits for O'Keeffe and colorfully patterned Mexican attire for Kahlo. And both artists have transcended the art world to become popular culture icons. I had the great pleasure of coordinating for the Brooklyn Museum two exhibitions that enrich our understanding of these two artists. First, as Patricia pointed out, I worked closely with the wonderful Wanda Korn to help her turn her years of scholarly research into the exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum called Georgia O'Keeffe Living Modern. Now on view here in Wichita with the title Georgia O'Keeffe Art, Image, Style, it examines the integrated modernist persona O'Keeffe crafted for herself through her dress, her art, and her progressive independent lifestyle. And the fact that Georgia O'Keeffe has come to the Wichita Art Museum is particularly thrilling, as Patricia pointed out, because this institution was among the first confirmed lenders to our show, agreeing to send us its precious O'Keeffe cityscape, which is so crucial to the show's narrative and which will continue to travel with the show once it leaves here. And just recently, I worked on Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving, the exhibition currently breaking attendance records back home in Brooklyn, on view until May 12th, so get your tickets now. It brings together the artist's clothing from the Frida Kahlo Museum in Mexico City, a number of her paintings, and many photographs of her to explore how she fashioned her own image, informed by her complex cultural heritage, experience of disability, political outlook, and passionate commitment to her native Mexico. That show originated at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And when the unmissable opportunity suddenly arose, and I do mean suddenly, for the material in it to come to the Brooklyn Museum, we jumped. And in only 6 months, my co-curator and I reorganized and reshaped the exhibition for our audiences. And in that case, we were also quite fortunate to be able to work closely with the fashion and art historians on whose scholarship that show was originally based. Now, as I was working on the Kahlo exhibition, which explores how her powerful self-portraits, the photographs for which she posed, and her uniquely styled Mexican outfits acted as complementary modes of artistic self-creation, I read this wonderful description of her in Vogue magazine in 1938, which you can see copied up there, in an article called "The Rise of Another Rivera," about her first and only solo exhibition in the United States at a gallery in New York City. And it says, I quote, "From the bright fuzzy woolen strings that she plaits into her black hair and the color she puts into her cheeks and lips, to her heavy antique Mexican necklaces and her gaily colored Tijuana blouses and skirts, Madame Rivera seems herself a product of her art, and, like all her work, one that is instinctively and calculatedly well composed." I immediately couldn't help thinking about Georgia O'Keeffe. First, because the reference to Kahlo as Madame Rivera, which is what she was typically called as the wife of the very famous artist Diego Rivera, reminded me of O'Keeffe's sassy response to being called Mrs. Stieglitz, which was to correct them right away and say, Miss O'Keeffe. But the Kahlo quote also reminded me of these two statements about O'Keeffe that were so formative for the exhibition art image style. And I'll read this quote. "One only has to look at the artist and note her clear-cut features and extreme simplicity of manner and spirituality to realize that she could not paint in any other way. Each picture is in a way a portrait of herself." And then another quote, "She never allowed her life to be one thing and her painting another." I was soon fascinated by the similarities and divergences between these two exceptional artists, each of whom adopted a carefully considered mode of dress as an integral part of her identity and creativity. Arguably the most photographed female artists of the 20th century, O'Keeffe and Kahlo both understood the power of that medium, as used by the lovers, friends, and professionals with whom they collaborated, to establish and enhance their reputations. And so, in my talk this evening, I will highlight O'Keeffe's and Kahlo's self-fashioned personas, while also sharing a bit about how complex exhibitions like these actually come together behind the scenes. Now, O'Keeffe's biography is well covered in the exhibition here, and I assume that most of you have seen it or will see it soon, I hope. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time tonight on the details of her life. But I do, however, want to take a moment to give a brief introduction to Frida Kahlo, whose work is not on view nearby, in case there's anyone here who is less familiar with this important Mexican modernist, although clearly I know some of you are because we've got our Fridas here in the audience. Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderón was born in Coyoacán in Mexico City in 1907 to a German-born father and a mother who was of indigenous and Spanish descent. Growing up, Kahlo was very close to her father, who was a professional photographer. She helped him in his studio, learning how to use the equipment and how to touch up photographs. Perhaps the most important thing she learned from him was how to pose for the camera. She was one of his favorite subjects, and many of the most powerful photos of the young Kahlo were taken by her father. These early photographic portraits would be an important influence on her own practice as a prolific self-portraitist, and I'm showing here now, where is it? Here we go. A triple self-portrait drawing that she made based on these three photographs taken by her father. Now, many of her own later compositions retain poses and angles she saw and internalized in her father's work. Kahlo contracted polio at the age of 6, which left her with one leg shorter and thinner than the other. This experience was difficult, but worse was to come. When she was 18 and attending a prestigious high school and planning to become a doctor, she almost died in a terrible traffic accident in Mexico City. She sustained severe internal injuries and broke her spine in several places. During a recovery period that necessitated extended periods of immobility, she abandoned her dream of medical school and started to paint, using a folding wooden easel and a mirror inset into the canopy of her bed. And you can see her easel construction of how she painted when she was in bed, and this is her bed now in her home in Mexico City. You can see the mirror above it. She noted at the time, "I am happy to be alive as long as I can paint." And self-portraiture became the primary focus of her art. And this is the first self-portrait here on the screen that she painted, which she made as a gift to her boyfriend at the time, who was with her during the accident. Throughout the rest of her life, she had multiple surgeries and spent a great deal of time in bed or in a wheelchair. Pain and disability shaped her life and was profoundly connected to her creativity. For example, she wore a variety of orthopedic corsets made of leather, steel, and plaster that she represented in her paintings and that she also adorned and decorated themselves, turning them into works of art. And this is one of the corsets that we have on view. When she was 22, she met and married Diego Rivera, 20 years her senior and already a world-renowned artist celebrity. Theirs was a tumultuous relationship, to say the absolute least, but it was an enduring one, strengthened by their fervent Mexican nationalism, love of art, and shared political commitment. They were both lifelong communists, as you saw from the hammer and sickle painted on her corset. And here is a picture, again, that's at the foot of her bed that she kept, which has portraits of Lenin, Mao, Stalin, all of her boyfriends. So Rivera and Kahlo pursued two very different modes in their art. Rivera, leader of the Mexican muralist movement, generally worked on a very large scale, making epic public art that frequently championed Mexican history and heroes, while Kahlo turned inward, mining her own psychic and physical experiences for images that were by definition very personal, but that were also infused with her love of Mexico. And although she painted still lives, she painted still lives, surreal, multi-figured compositions, and portraits of other people. She was best known for these piercing self-portraits. As she stated, "I paint self-portraits because I am the person I know best. I paint my own reality. The only thing I know is that I paint because I need to, and I paint whatever passes through my head without any other consideration." In the press release for her 1938 New York solo exhibition, the surrealist Andre Breton famously described her paintings as, quote, "a ribbon around a bomb." After years of surgery, illness, and pain, Kahlo died at the age of only 47. Kahlo and O'Keeffe developed and were noticed for their consistent sartorial codes quite early in their lives. As a girl, O'Keeffe adopted an austere personal style that set her apart from her schoolmates. While they wore puffed hairdos and big ribbons on their hair, O'Keeffe, who you can see right here, kept her hair sleek and restrained, and of all the girls in this group photograph, she wore the snuggest sleeves and cuffs. No hanging dangly sleeves for her. One of my absolute favorite quotes about O'Keeffe comes from her high school yearbook, which is on view here, where she was poetically described as a girl who would be different in habit, style, and dress, a girl who doesn't give a cent for men and boys still less. Now, as a young woman in Texas and then in New York, at the same time she was emerging as an artist with her groundbreaking, immediately recognizable style, O'Keeffe refined the minimalist look that would define her wardrobe for the next 70-plus years. Simple, organic lines, smooth, continuous silhouettes, geometric patterns, and a penchant for a particular color, which was noted by one of her Texas students who said, quote, "Oh, she wore black, 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 black." Her reason for this choice was recounted in an article about her in 1929. Quote, "She wears black almost invariably, not," she says, "because she prefers it, but because if she started picking out colors for dresses, she would have no time for painting." She also wore white dresses, as can be seen in the remarkable garments in the exhibition here, which have been attributed to her hand, but black predominates, often with pops of white at the cuffs and the neckline. She expressed her modernist aesthetic not only in the elemental, abstracted forms of her artwork, but in the simple styling of her garments, from her plain tunics to her black suits and wrap dresses. O'Keeffe perfected the art of uniform dressing. When posing for photographers, O'Keeffe purposefully dressed and composed her body to proclaim the same modernity that she declared on her canvases. Her public persona as a modern woman was thus established by photography, specifically the epic portrait series made by her husband, Alfred Stieglitz, in which her favored black and white garments and close-fitting hats were featured as significant compositional elements. Responding to O'Keeffe's own sartorial austerity and discipline, he created the visual template for her enduring image as a meditative and enigmatic minimalist. After his death, a new generation of photographers continued constructing images of the artist as a dignified and somewhat mysterious older woman, typically dressed in black, living what appeared to be a solitary, simple life in the American desert. Kahlo, too, was known in her lifetime for a strikingly coherent personal style. As one of her close friends recounted, she always had, quote, an aesthetic attitude about her dress. But where O'Keeffe's was pared down and subdued, Kahlo's was decorative and vibrant. This is well illustrated in these two photographs by Carl van Vechten, an American photographer known for his portraits of distinguished creatives. He typically posed his sitters against a studio backdrop of patterned wallpaper or fabric that he selected to correspond to some aspect of their work. O'Keeffe, a painter of flowers, poses in front of a floral pattern, but she stands out in sharp relief in her black clothes, making herself appear even more sculptural and streamlined by wrapping her head in a scarf. Kahlo is also set against a floral background, and she carries a Mexican gourd on her head. But in contrast to O'Keeffe, her flashing jewelry and embroidered shirt present a busy field of pattern, texture, and shape. She is colorful even in black and white. As a young woman, she wore European-style clothes like the dress in this photo, taken by her father a year after her accident, in which she carefully tucks her polio-affected leg behind the other one. She began to incorporate traditional Mexican clothing and accessories in her wardrobe when she married Rivera. Here you can see her wearing a rebozo or shawl in her wedding photo, their first wedding photo. They were married twice to each other. And in this beautiful picture, she wears a necklace of ancient Maya jade beads that he gave to her. But a photograph recently discovered at her home, the Blue House, shows her mother as a young girl and other family members. She circled her own mother. You can see she wrote Mama here. Fully dressed in the tradition of the Tijuana women of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in Oaxaca, southern Mexico, revealing that she had a relationship with this form of dress long before she met Rivera. Her wardrobe would always include some European-style blouses, dungarees, and garments from other regions in Mexico. But by her early 20s, she primarily had adopted as her artistic uniform the richly embroidered tunics, woven shawls, long flounced skirts, gold jewelry, and elaborate hairstyles of the Tijuana. Now, O'Keeffe's manner of dress was politically inflected in that it indicated her solidarity with the women's dress reform movement of the 19 teens, which sought to free modern women from corsets, flamboyant hats, and other constraining or non-functional fashion fripperies. But Kahlo's form of dress was overtly political. She dressed as she did to explicitly signify her progressive political beliefs and populist allegiance to the culture of her native country, in contrast to what she perceived as the impersonal and industrialized United States. In the early 1930s, when Kahlo arrived in San Francisco with Rivera, who had been invited there to paint murals for the city's Pacific Stock Exchange, her vivid and to American eyes exotic clothing caused quite a stir. And I have to say, I love this photo. We had it in the show, as we like to say, primarily for scale, because we like to indicate the difference in size. So newspapers described Kahlo in patronizing and exoticizing terms, such as, quote, Frida, Diego's beautiful young wife, is part of the picture. She wears the native costume, a tight-bodied, full-skirted muslin dress, the classic rebozo draped about her shoulders, and a massive string of Aztec beads about her slender, brown throat. Kahlo enjoyed the attention, writing to her mother that, quote, the gringas really like me a lot and take notice of all the dresses and rebozos that I brought with me. Their jaws drop at the sight of my jade necklaces, and all the painters want me to pose for them. Certainly, many important modernist photographers like Imogen Cunningham and Edward Weston wanted to take her picture. Witnessing her sensational presence, Weston wrote, dressed in native costume, she causes much excitement on the streets of San Francisco. People stop in their tracks and look in wonder. And according to an interview she gave to the New Yorker magazine in 1938 when she was in the city for her gallery show, Kahlo said she was asked if she was a fortune teller when she was on her way, when she was going to the subway. For her entire adult life, Kahlo's carefully cultivated appearance, as captured in photography, from her complex hairstyles and her colorful patterned skirts and the heavy jewelry she wore, was of enduring public interest. And she sat for photographers you can see here, such as Leo Matisse, Manuel Alvarez Bravo, who took this beautiful portrait of her here with this lovely reflective glass globe in the background and some sculpture down here, to Bernard Silberstein and Lola Alvarez Bravo, Silberstein giving her kind of the classic sort of Hollywood glamour sort of headshot. But no one is more associated with the iconic and glamorous image of Frida Kahlo than the fashion photographer Nicholas Marais. They met in 1931 and had an on-again, off-again romantic relationship and a lifelong friendship. Marais' pioneering saturated color technique heightened the intensity of Kahlo's vibrant wardrobe and accessories to reveal the care she took with her palette, from matching her rebozo to the flowers in her hair to her Revlon lipstick and nail polish, which is also featured in the exhibition, and Revlon is our sponsor. All we had to tell them was that Revlon was Frida Kahlo's favorite makeup, and they were right there. Now, his portrait of her in the magenta rebozo that we just saw has become the classic image of Kahlo, and she loved it, writing to him that it was a treasure. A year after it was taken, it was reproduced in Coronet magazine, which was sort of a celebrity magazine. This was from 1939 or so, I think, in an article that was about Marais' celebrity photography, and it was placed, as you can see, opposite a photo of Ginger Rogers that he took. And when she saw the magazine on the stands, she wrote to Marais again and said, quote, "My photo is the best of all. The other wenches are okay too. The one of myself is a real F.W. And then she went on in parentheses to say to him, do you still remember that translation? Effing wonder. Except in her letter, she wrote out the word. effing. Speaking of glamour, Kahlo was photographed by Tony Frisell for Vogue magazine in 1937, wearing what the magazine described as Indian dress, holding her magenta rebozo aloft with an agave plant behind her, striking the kind of pose that one would expect in a fashion magazine. And it's funny that although her image serves as the article's frontispiece, the article isn't really about her at all. It's a really inane article about so-called sophisticated Mexican society ladies, and its only reference to Kahlo is to report that everyone who visits the country of Mexico wants to meet, quote, the great mural painter and see his beautiful wife Frida in the native costume that she affects. Now, I want to take a moment to mention the aesthetic homes Kahlo and O'Keeffe created for themselves that were significant parts of their public identity. Kahlo drew this really charming plan of her home, the Blue House in Mexico City, showing the layout of all the rooms and the enclosed garden courtyard with all of her menagerie of pets. She had parrots, monkeys, a deer, her beloved Xolo Escuincle dogs, and even showing, washing hanging on the line. And in one corner, right here, she wrote, "Here I was born," alongside this little sketch of her face. And if you look really closely, you can see her unibrow that she included in the little sketch. In the mid-1930s, Kahlo and Rivera redesigned this house, originally built in 1904 by her father, and where she lived most of her life. In the spirit of the post-revolutionary national Mexican movement known as Mexicanidad, which took pride in Mexico's multifaceted history and cultural legacy, they repainted the walls of the house this beautiful, vibrant blue, and filled the garden and its rooms with great Mesoamerican sculptures and Mexican folk art. And I'm showing you here, these are pictures I took on a recent trip there, and these are some pictures by various photographers showing her in her garden at the Blue House, and you can see some of the sculptures all around her dogs there. And then some items, from her home, the same kind of gourd that she was wearing on her head in the Van Vechten photo, and these wonderful skeleton bits of folk art. And here's a little bonus detail. This collage or butterfly drawing that she hung over her bed was a gift to her by the artist Noguchi, with whom she also had a relationship. She kept that over her bed. And another photograph of her in her studio, which I show because, again, you can see on the shelves behind her, very similar, I should point out, to the beautiful collection of Mesoamerican sculpture that is right outside this auditorium that belongs to Wichita's collection. So she collected that as well. So Kahlo often incorporated the Mexican art and artifacts that she and Rivera collected into her paintings, transforming them into alter egos. You see some of them here on the foreground here, and this is an ancient mask that she used for this figure. And they appear in many photographs of her as well, amplifying her ethnic identity. In this one by Marai, she wears a favorite Tehuantepec huipil or tunic and holds an ancient Olmec figurine like Christian saints hold the sacred object that define their martyrdom. And even her pet dogs played a talismanic role in her creative universe. She loved the hairless Xolo Escuincle dog, which was also a symbol of the Aztec canine god associated with the underworld. Her collection included ancient Colima dog sculptures, like there are some, again, outside this doorway. And her dogs are often with her in photographs at the Blue House, as you can see there. She painted them as well, either as themselves or as sculptures. And you can see this figure in this really crazy self-portrait with Diego. And she based it on this sculpture. O'Keeffe's image in her later years was also intimately connected to her adobe homes in Mexico, which she designed and furnished according to the same modernist taste for simplicity that informed her art and dress. Her friend, the photographer Laura Gilpin, noted that, quote, beauty of spacing and simplicity of design are the two major qualities that dominate her painting. They are also the dominant characteristics of her house in Abiquiu, New Mexico. Indeed, her house and her painting are all of a piece. Filled with mid-century modern furniture, it was, as one art critic wrote, probably her best late work. In fact, her fullest statement about art and life. Many of the photographers who visited her there, like Philippe Halsman, featured in their pictures of her the bleached skulls she so often painted. And like Kahlo's Olmec figurines, O'Keeffe's skulls were an indelible part of her image, signifying the solitary life she was imagined to lead in the remote desert, as well as the organic, bold forms of her artwork. Now, although O'Keeffe and Kahlo led very different lives and didn't really resemble each other, they do share a few sartorial motifs. Like other radical women in the 1920s, O'Keeffe experimented with gender-bending clothing to challenge and confound society's conventional codes for men and women. Some of the photographs Stieglitz made of her emphasized the way her clothing obscured her gender or made her appear simultaneously male and female. Her tendency toward an androgynous or even masculine appearance was also noticed early, with one of her high school classmates stating that she would have made a strikingly handsome boy. And in Texas, one of O'Keeffe's own former art students observed that her clothing was all like men's clothing, straight lines. She didn't believe in lace or ruffles or things like that. And in this intriguing photograph taken at something called a leap year party in 1907, a 20-year-old O'Keeffe is dressed or costumed as a young man in a dark jacket and bow tie, peering out rakishly from a group of fellow cross-dressers. Now, the androgynous look that O'Keeffe had embraced her entire life reached its apotheosis in her later years when she began to wear 2- and 3-piece suits custom made by menswear tailoring houses who catered to women like her and Marlene Dietrich, who preferred the distinctive material, cut, and fit of pantsuits. Now, although Kahlo was best known during her life for her elaborate self-presentations as a Tehuana woman, like O'Keeffe, she also performed more androgynous or masculine versions of herself. In this otherwise conventional family photograph taken by her father in 1926, 19-year-old Kahlo flaunts an unconventional male persona. There's Frida. Donning a man's 3-piece suit and wearing her hair slicked straight back. And it's fascinating to me that, it shows the close relationship as creatives she and her father had. Her own father was known to take his own rather flamboyant self-portraits of himself in costume or even naked, and so I think there was kind of a mind meld between the two of them. Several years later, she was captured with Rivera in this photo taken by Tina Modotti at a May Day protest, wearing a button-down shirt and tie with a narrow skirt, her hair pulled back in the same austere style we saw in the family photograph. Rivera celebrated Kahlo's commitment to communism as well as this sort of masculine attire in this detail from his 1928 mural for the new Ministry of Education building in Mexico City called The Ballad of the Proletariat Revolution. That's a great title for you. This detail depicts her looking similarly masculine, wearing a red shirt with the communist star and handing out weapons. Now, she revisited the menswear look in 1940 in one of her most remarkable paintings, Self-Portrait with Cropped Hair, where she depicts herself wearing an ill-fitting men's suit, likely meant to be Rivera's, with the sinuous clumps of her long, shorn hair littering the barren ground around her. She really leaned into her androgyny in this self-portrait, pairing the suit, if you'll notice, with heeled shoes and nice dangly earrings. Now, she acknowledged and called attention to what she deemed to be her masculine features, saying, quote, "I have the mustache and in general the face of the opposite sex." and by proudly and meticulously painting her dark facial hair in her self-portraits, even those like this one that include traditional signifiers of femininity, like this very delicate lace of her shirt and the equally delicate hair bow. Kahlo and O'Keeffe were both early adopters of blue jeans, a garment that in the 1930s and 40s was not everyday wear for women, but rather a Western chic style for dude ranch visits only. As this wonderful advertisement, not advertisement, rather it's an editorial from Vogue in 1935 explains. O'Keeffe, who embraced the Americanness of blue jeans, described them as our only national costume, seems to have worn them primarily at work, when she worked outdoors or on wilderness trips. Kahlo, who wore them sometimes at work in her studio, brought them into her own hybrid sensibility by pairing them with her embroidered blouses and hair ribbons in this very playfully androgynous manner. And they also shared a taste for Asian-style garments and embellishments. In the early days of their relationship, Stieglitz made a series of photographs of O'Keeffe wearing a nearly transparent white kimono, like this. Drawn to kimonos for their comfort, they were also part of her larger exploration of Japanese art and culture, which reflected the craze for Japanese art and design in the early years of the 20th century. The garment's associations in Western imagination with sexual exoticism amplifies, of course, the already intimate nature of these photographs. And O'Keeffe did not wear a kimono again for a photographer until her very last formal portrait ever taken of her, with the fashion photographer Bruce Weber at the age of 97, this time pairing the kimono with her vaquero hat, which amplifies this sort of gender-fluid look. And she likely wore this Chinese cheng pao, which is a man's traditional side-buttoning robe, as a painter's smock. It's got wonderful paint stains on it. And on trips to Hong Kong and Taiwan in her later years, she also bought a variety of ordinary off-the-rack pieces that would have been worn, like this one in the photograph, by middle-class Chinese people. And then she would also commission tailors in Hong Kong to create this kind of bespoke clothing, these wonderful silk suits that feature the mandarin collars and the frog buttons, all of these Chinese-inflected details. Now, during her first visit to San Francisco, Kahlo became fascinated by Chinatown, writing to her father, "Imagine, there are 10,000 Chinese here. In their shops, they sell beautiful things, clothing and handmade fabrics of very fine silk." Kahlo sourced most of her Chinese garments, embroideries, and fabrics during her visits there, probably including this length of embroidered silk that forms part of the hem of this skirt of hers, and this exquisitely embroidered skirt. Which, in keeping with, again, her hybrid style, she likely wore it with one of her rebozos, reflecting the opinion she shared in another letter from San Francisco to her mother, where she wrote, "More and more I am convinced that Mexicans come from China, because we are entirely the same kind of people." Now, she liked Chinese motifs so much that she added these silk panels embroidered with Chinese dragons to her red leather wedge-heeled lace-up boots, which were custom-made for her after one of her legs was amputated just before she died. And you see it's on her prosthetic leg here. Accessories were a significant part of the look both artists fashioned for themselves, from Kahlo's many, many rings and ribbons and floral headpieces to O'Keeffe's head wraps and her beloved vaquero hat. The most significant accessory for O'Keeffe, of course, was the gorgeous brass pin created especially for her by the sculptor Alexander Calder. It spells out the first two letters of her name, a large spiral for the letter O, followed by the letter K. And when the pin is worn horizontally, as you see it in the photo here, the letters are easily recognized. But O'Keeffe preferred wearing the pin on the vertical, with the O at the top and the K below, so it read more like one of her her organic abstractions or a stylized kind of plant form. Kahlo also received a very important gift of jewelry from an artist. These incredible hand earrings were given to her by Pablo Picasso in 1939 when she was in Paris for an exhibition that included her work and to which many art stars of the day came. As she wrote to friends, she got a big hug from Juan Miro and congratulations from Picasso and Tanguy and all of the other big cacas of surrealism, as she called them. She made an impression on Kandinsky as well, who wrote to his friends about seeing Diego Rivera's wife. He said, quote, "She was there in person, in Mexican dress, very charming. It seems that she always dresses like that. There were many rather eccentric-looking ladies, the Montparnasse spirit, but none could rival the Mexican dress." And this photo here is taken of her in Paris by Dora Maar, the photographer who was also in a relationship with Picasso. So that's probably how Kandinsky saw her. Second only to the Calder pin for O'Keeffe as an indelible part of her style was the black suede and silver belt that she acquired in the late 50s, designed by Hector Aguilar. He was a very admired Mexican silversmith who sold his jewelry in American department stores that O'Keeffe frequented. And she can be seen wearing this belt, which features the kind of geometric shapes that she was drawn to. You can see it in numerous photographs, most frequently paired either with her Claire McCardle dress or here with her wrap dress. And Kahlo also owned this heavy Hector Aguilar necklace made of silver and malachite, which she can be seen wearing in this photo when she had added to it this rectangular pendant with an ancient ceramic figure in the middle, which is since lost, sadly. Now, O'Keeffe would never wear something that heavy and ornate on her person. Her adornment extended only to the Calder pin, her Navajo silver button, and the silver bracelet here that just peeks out that you can see in that photograph. And it was actually fascinating to find out that O'Keeffe did own this incredible statement squash blossom necklace, similar in scale to Kahlo's Aguilar necklace, but O'Keeffe hung it on the wall as a design element in her otherwise predictably minimal bedroom at Abiquiu. Now, both of these artists created a distinctive aesthetic that applied to their paintings as well as to the ways they dressed and the environments they created for themselves. And as we've seen, there are many general and specific comparisons that can be made between them. But there's an essential difference in the way that this unitary aesthetic manifests in these two artists. And I hope it's become a bit clear so far, but I want to try and summarize it with the help of two photographs. So in this image, George Mobley, the photographer, clarified O'Keeffe's modernist integration by seating her next to one of her paintings of the Black Place. You can see there. She's dressed in a black suit with a white shirt and her black hat, and she's sharply silhouetted against the white wall. The shape and the flow and the colors of O'Keeffe's dressed body, her minimalist style, rhymes with the abstracted landscape painting. Now, look at this photograph of Kahlo taken by her friend Lucienne Bloch. Wearing a white blouse with her hair pulled back, she too sits against a white wall beneath one of her self-portraits, in fact, one that we looked at earlier. She and her painted image are near reflections of each other, dressed almost identically, wearing chunky necklaces that are not quite the same, but similar. Kahlo made her deliberately fashioned self, face, hair, body, clothes, her subject. Indeed, many of her paintings, and many of them, clothes appear as her psychic avatars or even as symbols of Mexico. I was just showing you just several examples where her own form of dress is a real significant part of the composition. In contrast, O'Keeffe did not make her face or her dressed body the subject of her paintings, but rather applied her aesthetic vocabulary of color, line, and shape to all aspects of her life so that they were formally united. O'Keeffe's painting and clothes echo each other. Kahlo's paintings and clothes mirror each other. Now, we tried to convey these nuanced relationships among the clothes, the artwork, and the photographs in the installation design for each of these exhibitions. And I want to share something of that process in the rest of my time this evening. Now, of course, exhibitions have explanatory labels that present the exhibition's themes, but we also know that there are many museum goers who don't read all or any labels, although now I have it on good authority that people here are reading the labels, so that makes me feel good. But in any case, walking through an exhibition is a three-dimensional visual experience, much different than reading a book. And so it was interesting for me to think about the approaches we took to designing these two exhibitions in Brooklyn, each of which had a different genesis. For Georgia O'Keeffe, we were the originators of the exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum, so we could start from zero. And one of the most challenging aspects was turning the enormous body of scholarship that Wanda Korn has produced and that fill the beautiful book that accompanies this exhibition into a more streamlined gallery experience. To put it succinctly, we couldn't put everything pictured or discussed in her book into the exhibition. Research and scholarship is a completist activity. Exhibition curation is, by definition, one of selection and choice. So I worked closely with Wanda to confirm which of O'Keeffe's clothes would tell the story in the most visually impactful way. And I remember many conversations with Wanda in which I said some version of, "Let them discover that blouse in your book." Choosing an appropriate wall color is vital, as it can help convey or reinforce the messages of the exhibition. Now, at the time we organized it in Brooklyn, we had a chief curator who believed strictly in the so-called white box aesthetic for modern art. So for her, color on the wall, especially a rich or a vivid one, was almost unthinkable. In this case, because O'Keeffe herself took a fairly restrained approach to color in her homes and in her dress, this worked well, so most of the walls in Brooklyn, which I'm showing you here, were white. But we did successfully lobby for one accent color wall. When we went to Abiquiu in preparation for the exhibition, we were so struck by the beautiful, deep grayish, purpley color that she had painted her bedroom. And we were even more struck to learn that O'Keeffe had mixed that color specially to match the color of the mud on a riverbank near her house that she loved. So the director of the Abiquiu property went and got some of that mud and sent it to us so that we could recreate the color for several walls in the exhibition, which was a subtle way to conjure the mood of her home. And other museums who have hosted this exhibition have followed this idea. You can see it as presented in Renolda House and Cleveland Art Museum, and I'm happy to say here in Wichita I see a similar wall choice. Now, installing a painting or a sculpture show is traditionally fairly straightforward. Things hang on a wall, they go on pedestals, maybe in a case, if you're going crazy. With garments, it is an entirely different world. Dressing mannequins takes a lot of time, lots of fluffing, stuffing, and manipulating to be sure that everything drapes correctly and is shaped to its best advantage. And so I'm just showing you two kind of, on the job scenes of that happening both with O'Keeffe in one of our in our conservation lab actually, and O'Keeffe and Kahlo rather, as we were trying to put some of the garments in place. And remember, it's all the more difficult when you're dealing with clothes like Kahlo and O'Keeffe's that are not at all couture garments. I've worked on exhibitions before where the clothes are couture garments, handmade, designed to within an inch of their lives to look a very particular way. These are not those kinds of clothes, so they need extra TLC to look their best when presented in an exhibition. And then there's the question of how to display the clothes. Dress form, mannequin, and the biggest issue of all, head or no head. In other words, are you trying to evoke the body or to ignore it? Some fashion exhibitions use the body and the head, often with blank or unarticulated faces, as a as a creative part of the design, because the head relates to the style being presented. In the center here is a install shot of a great show the Met did many years ago called Dangerous Liaisons about 18th century fashion. So of course the towering wigs are part of that aesthetic. This was the Kawakuba show a few years ago, and this I think was the Prada Schiaparelli show where they went sort of very surrealist with their heads. Other exhibitions use a kind of generic face, or one based on the same kind of generic model's face, with or without hair. And some exhibitions, interestingly, have been more or less sensitive to the racial implications of doing this. At FIT's exhibition of black fashion designers, they thought it quite important, obviously, to have mannequins of color, something that you don't often think about. So the most extraordinary solution I witnessed was the Jean-Paul Gaultier exhibition that I coordinated at the Brooklyn Museum, and I do wish that I had video of this to show you. The custom mannequin heads had facial videos projected onto them so that they spoke, they sang, they made expressions, they followed you around the gallery. It was incredible. That was quite a fascinating show. Now, often there are no heads or bodies, just a form with a neck cap, which is the choice they made in a recent exhibition of Princess Diana's clothes at Kensington Palace, which you see here. So for O'Keeffe, we chose to display the garments on simple dress forms with capped necks mounted on poles or hangers because we wanted to emphasize the lines and silhouettes of the garments, creating an abstract experience of the clothes that was more in keeping with Kahlo's artwork. Not to mention that it would be odd to have generic heads in an exhibition about a specific person, but we also really wanted to avoid creating galleries filled with Georgias. Her face and body already had an enormous presence in the exhibition through the photographs she posed for, and we didn't want to add an additional level of representation. And this minimal presentation also helped highlight the formal relationships among and consistency across O'Keeffe's actual clothes, the way she dressed for the camera, and her artwork. And so in Brooklyn, these were some of the strongest vignettes in the exhibition, which turned out to be, by the way, what we now call Instagram moments in exhibitions, because this is where everyone, you have to plan out, where's everyone going to take the picture. So I loved this section where we had O'Keeffe's early handmade cream silk dresses juxtaposed with some of her paintings from the 1920s, when she often worked entirely in shades of black and white, the same restricted palette she used in her dress. Cleveland presented these dresses differently, but in an equally striking way against a dark wall. And here, back in Brooklyn, where we were able to make very clear how the decoration at the center of this blouse and this detail, this gorgeous blouse, recalls O'Keeffe's paintings of crinkly-edged autumn leaves. Another favorite juxtaposition is the 1954 Pucci Dress, which we placed with abstract paintings of her patio at Abiquiu from the same period in the 50s, and a series of amazing Polaroids she took at Glen Canyon. Now, all of these items demonstrate how elements of her personal formal vocabulary, V-shapes and V-necklines, geometric shapes and bold contours, informed her aesthetic choices in dress, in art, and in the way she pictured the world. And Wichita has done, mixed it up slightly, still in an amazing way. You've got new and different paintings here, and that's one of the exciting things, is that an exhibition like this gets renewed in really exciting ways at each venue that it appears in. Now, working on the Frida Kahlo exhibition was a very different experience. First of all, this was an exhibition initially organized and presented at another institution. And because we were collaborating with the original curator who was involved with design decisions made at the Victoria and Albert, we had to be careful about how we staged the exhibition in Brooklyn. We were expected to hew as closely to the original concept as possible for us, given our unique galleries, our budget, and the very small amount of time we had to get it all done. And this brings me back to the issue of mannequins. The V&A, where these pictures are from, spent a great deal of time and money developing custom mannequins for Kahlo's clothing that included arms and what can only be described as Frida heads. And this is a picture of of our great conservator at Brooklyn brandishing one of these Frida heads. 3D printed, these schematic yet recognizable faces include her iconic hairstyle. And they also decided on a surface color and texture meant to evoke ancient stone, so I was told. Now, because the mannequin bodies were custom made for each garment, this is another behind the scenes as we were getting ready to install, the Frida Kahlo Museum, which owns her clothes, insisted that these mannequins be used. And in any event, we had no time to source other options. And in full disclosure, I am not a fan of these heads at all. I personally find them distracting and more than a little bit creepy. They substantiate all the reasons why we did not want Georgia heads in our exhibition. But at the same time, I can see how they can work for an exhibition about this particular artist. As I mentioned before, unlike the abstract artist O'Keeffe, Kahlo made herself and her biography a central part of her work. She focused on her face, her hair, and her body, in life as well as in art, so one can argue that a mannequin likeness of her is an appropriate strategy. The London presentation was also, to my eye, at once overly theatricalized and very, very literal. One of the main showcases of her dresses in London that you see here was designed to evoke an Aztec temple. And you can see that the one dress inside this big case here in the center that doesn't have a mannequin was given golden antlers and roots, which are two motifs that reference paintings by Kahlo, which were not in the show. Two mannequins were posed to imitate her most famous double self-portrait, the two Fridas. Another was presented in a complicated, recessed vitrine looking into a mirror. And most distressing of all, to me at least, the room dedicated to her orthopedic devices used vitrines that were created to look like her bed and her hospital beds. Ooh, I know. That's what I said when I walked into the exhibition. In Brooklyn, we fought hard to eliminate any painting reenactments, and we tried all around for a more streamlined, less staged presentation. We worked with wall colors derived from her home, particularly the rich blue and rust colors seen here in the part of our exhibition that was about the Blue House. All the garments, unlike O'Keeffe's here, all the garments of Frida Kahlo had to be displayed in vitrines. And since we didn't have the time or the money to construct that kind of large central plexi box that they used in London for the majority of the clothes, we opted for this more open arrangement with a few garments presented individually and the rest in two cases opposite each other along the wall. Mirrors placed behind the clothes allowed visitors to get a 3D look while also evoking Kahlo's love of mirrors and this notion of reflection without being too on the nose about it. So in this exhibition also, we were conscious of organizing vignettes that express the visual unity of Kahlo's self-fashioning in art and dress. The enormous role Kahlo's clothes played within her own work was asserted at the beginning of the exhibition, where we placed her amazing self-portrait as a Tijuana with Diego on my mind, is the full title of that painting, in which she wears the starched resplendor headdress and sumptuous flowers in her hair, and we placed it near the actual resplendor that she owned and wore. Now, unlike London's presentation for the orthopedic corsets, which I remind you of here, we really wanted to shift the their emphasis on suffering and medicalization and make it more about a manifestation of her creativity and connect it to that. So we intentionally presented these incredible plaster corsets like paintings, like painted sculptures in this, very clean, kind of scenario. Now, both O'Keeffe and Kahlo have maintained an extremely high profile in popular culture, not least because of their well-known personal style. And one of the funniest recent manifestations of this is the photo shoot that actress Jessica Lange did, in which she recreated the look and poses of famous women in famous photographs, and naturally, Kahlo and O'Keeffe were among them. Did you know right away when I put this on that was not Kahlo and O'Keeffe? Kahlo has been played in a movie by Salma Hayek, been animated in the recent Pixar movie Coco, and most regrettably has been made into a Barbie doll. Really bad. Countless designers, like Jean-Paul Gaultier, have been inspired by her dress. Gaultier did an entire collection based on Kahlo, and some others with very mixed results. And I'm just showing you a random selection of Kahlo-inspired fashion, which ranges from the really awful and in bad taste to the sort of humorous, I love that her shirt says revolution, because nothing says high expensive fashion like a communist model as Kahlo was. O'Keeffe gained true celebrity status by the 1960s, of course, appearing on the cover of Life magazine and in numerous other publications which featured her unique homes. In the 1980s, Calvin Klein shot a very famous ad campaign at her homes in Abiquiu and Ghost Ranch, reclining on her beds and really getting into the whole Georgia O'Keeffe moment. Other fashion editorials appear regularly, not only shooting in or near her homes, but also highlighting fashions that mine her look or replicate some of the best-known photographs of her. And in recent years, thanks in no small part to the Brooklyn Museum exhibition, fashion designers keep rediscovering her. Dior's creative director, Maria Grazia Chiuri, explained last year that when working on her recent collection, she said, quote, "I did indeed find many sources of inspiration in the Georgia O'Keeffe show in New York. It was particularly interesting because it didn't focus so much on the work as on the shamanic artist herself." And just last week, as I was preparing this talk, I saw this delightful Instagram post by Diane Keaton, who I am sure no one will be surprised to learn is an O'Keeffe fan. She's photoshopped herself in. She was so excited to see that she had a skirt that looked like one of O'Keeffe's skirts that she had to post about it. And as you may or may not be surprised to learn, Frida Kahlo was also a fan of Georgia O'Keeffe. Yes, these two incredible women knew each other. They first met in New York around 1932. They saw each other again in 1933. O'Keeffe and Stieglitz attended the opening of Kahlo's New York exhibition in 1938, and O'Keeffe visited her at the Blue House in Mexico City in 1951, just a few years before she died. Exactly how well the two knew each other, however, remains something of a mystery. And I want to end my talk this evening with two letters written by Kahlo that hint at their relationship. On April 11th, 1933, Kahlo was staying in New York at the Barbizon Plaza. We've seen this photo, and that's where it was taken. And she wrote to a friend that she had recently seen O'Keeffe, who had just left the hospital where she had been admitted with a diagnosis of psychoneurosis, which I understand basically means nervous breakdown. And here's what Kahlo wrote to her friend in April 1933. Quote, O'Keeffe was in the hospital for 3 months. She went to Bermuda for a rest. She didn't make love to me that time, I think on account of her weakness. Too bad. We have no way of corroborating if they actually had a romantic or sexual relationship, or if this was just wishful thinking on Kahlo's part, which is entirely possible. We know that Kahlo had relationships with women, but whether O'Keeffe was also bisexual remains speculation. But on March 1st, 1933, just a bit more than a month before Kahlo wrote that cheeky letter to her friend, Kahlo was in Detroit, and she wrote this letter directly to O'Keeffe, and I want to end by reading it in its entirety. Georgia, was wonderful to hear your voice again. Every day since I called you, and many times before months ago, I wanted to write you a letter. I wrote you many, but every one seemed more stupid and empty, and I tore them up. I can't write in English all that I would like to tell, especially to you. I am sending this one because I promised it to you. I felt terrible when Sybil Brown told me that you were sick, but I still don't know what is the matter with you. Please, Georgia dear, if you can't write, ask Stieglitz to do it for you, and let me know how you are feeling, will you? I'll be in Detroit 2 more weeks. I would like to tell you everything that happened to me since the last time we saw each other, but most of them are sad, and you mustn't know sad things now. After all, I shouldn't complain because I have been happy in many ways, though. Diego is good to me, and you can't imagine how happy he has been working on the frescoes here. I have been painting a little too, and that helped. I thought of you a lot and never forget your wonderful hands and the color of your eyes. I will see you soon. I am sure that in New York I will be much happier. If you're still in the hospital when I come back, I will bring you flowers, but it is so difficult to find the ones I would like for you. I would be so happy if you could write me even 2 words. I like you very much, Georgia. Frida. Thank you.